It's become a common horror trope. The killer hitchhiker. The guy you pick up who looks nice enough, but as soon as he gets in the car, there's a gun in your face, and you don't come out of the encounter alive. Well, I'm going to tell you about the real man who inspired this trope. He had an entire nation in terror for 2 weeks in 1950 to 1951. And he kind of started a whole film series. In 1953, a movie called The Hitchhiker came out, and it was based directly on this guy, Billy Cockeyed Cook. Billy went on a 21-day killing spree. He killed 6 people, including 3 children and the family dog. The manhunt for him was one of the biggest in history. According to some historians, it dwarfed anything that occurred during the Public Enemies era. Life magazine did a whole story on him. That's the modern equivalent of Dateline, 48 Hours, 2020. In a way, it was kind of like the O.J. Simpson chase. The entire country was breathlessly watching and waiting to see when they would catch this guy. And I think about all of the people he hitchhiked with and then let them go. It was so random on who he chose to kill and who he let go. Hello, all of my history-loving friends. This is Madam Morbid. I'm your guide on any number of historical adventures. I'm here at Peace Church Cemetery, and I'm actually here to talk about a really not nice person. Probably the most evil, awful person I have ever researched. And I've done gangsters, but I don't think anybody was as much of an actual psychopath and cold-blooded killer than this guy. His grave is not marked. All I know is he's buried here, and it's actually a really beautiful cemetery. The guy I'm here to see's name was Billy Cook. William Cook Jr. Oh my God, really? Nobody was mowing until I started talking, literally. My little girl's here with me, so if you hear weird noises, it's her. The sign right here is where the church used to stand. I don't know what makes some people become literal monsters. And I know there's always been this debate, nature versus nurture. Are some people just born bad? Or can a normal person be turned bad by a horrendous, abusive childhood without love? I don't know, and I'm not qualified to answer that. But the feeling I get, my own personal opinion, is I think it's a combination of both. I think some people can be born bad, but maybe the nurture can help counteract some of that. But if you have a person predisposed to violence or anger and they have a terrible childhood, I think that's when you get monsters. Like this guy, like Manson, like some of our worst and most horrible killers. I don't have any science behind that other than to just say that, kind of get that feeling. There are people who actually study this, so trust them, not me. But what do you think? Are people born bad? Can people be made bad by not having love in their life? One thing I can tell you is that this guy's childhood was very bad. And he had a lot of siblings. He was 8 of 8, so most of his other siblings had their mother to take care of them. But she died when he was 5 of a cerebral hemorrhage, and he found her body. Him and a sister, I don't know how old the sister was. Being the youngest, he didn't have his mom in his life, and his father was an alcoholic. I don't know if he abused the kids, but he most definitely was an alcoholic and not responsible. They're all living in an abandoned mine shaft. And then one day he just leaves. I don't know how many of the kids were in this mine shaft. I'm thinking some of them probably were at adult age. But Billy was definitely there, and eventually the authorities did find these kids and put them all into a foster home except for Billy. The story is no one wanted to adopt him because he looked very sinister because of a congenital birth defect that made his right eye never close. The birth defect actually was a growth on that right eye, and they did a surgery to remove that, which didn't work very well, and then his eye wouldn't close. I tend to think it had to have been more of the behavior issues that no one wanted to deal with him. If you've got a child who won't behave, why would you want to take it in? I hope it wasn't just because he had a visual defect on his face. That's horrible if that's true. So you've got this kid, he's alone, he has no mom, he was rejected by his father, he was rejected by foster homes, so he's a ward of the state. The only way they finally got somebody to take him in was to pay them to do so. And I don't know how he was treated by the people caring for him. I do know that what they really wanted was the money, and that caring for him was not their main goal. And he started to get in trouble. And as with most criminals, he started just doing petty stuff. Stealing, vandalism, truancy. He was picked up for truancy at one point, and he finally said, "I'd rather live in reform school than live in this foster system." And that's what they did. So he spent the majority of his life in some sort of reform institution. He was never loved. No one cared about him. No one wanted him. That does make me sad. Now, what he ended up doing? Yeah, no. You guys know I have studied the crap out of Clyde Barrow, and I've had people get in the comments and be like, he was a bloodthirsty killer psychopath. Clyde Barrow wasn't any of those things. He had an immense sense of self-preservation, and he would do anything to protect himself, to stay alive, to keep moving. This guy was angry, vindictive, cold-blooded, merciless. He had to have been a psychopath. He had reason to be angry. He had a rough deal in life as a kid, but no excuses. He got tattoos on his fists, each finger, hard luck. Similar to that, Robert Mitchum, in his movie The Night of the Hunter, has a similar thing. He has love and hate tattooed on his fingers. That movie was based on a 1953 novel of the same name, and it is really possible that the author of that novel was inspired by Billy Cook having tattoos on his knuckles. I can't verify that, I don't know that for sure, but this was a massive story. There's no way this novelist would not have known about it. Either way, it's a really good movie. If you have never seen it, you should watch it. When Billy was 11, he was sent to reform school. After being released from reform school, Billy couldn't help himself. He robbed a cab driver of $11, was sent this time to Missouri State Penitentiary, which is a horrible prison. I've toured it twice. It is creepier, in my opinion, than Alcatraz. While in prison here, he was teased by another inmate for his eye, so he took a baseball bat and nearly beat this inmate to death. I'm not sure why inmates in a prison like that had access to a baseball bat, but evidently they did. At one point, the prison was called the bloodiest 47 acres in America. So you can see how I would wonder why they would let somebody have access to a baseball bat in a prison with that reputation. And he was released from there in 1950 when he was 22 years old. He went back and reconnected with his alcoholic father and is said to have told his father that what he wanted to do with his life at that point was live by the gun and roam. He headed west, went to Texas, bought a .32 caliber pistol in El Paso, hitched and wandered, stayed for a while in California, actually had a job there for a while it seems, then headed back to Texas. Now he goes and he just takes his rage out on strangers. Strangers who didn't deserve it. His spree began December 30th, 1950. He was in Lubbock, Texas, and he was hitchhiking. A man named Lee Archer, he worked as a mechanic, saw a man hitchhiking, and of course, picking up hitchhikers was not unusual and it wasn't considered dangerous. So he stopped. But the next thing he knows, this guy has pulled a gun on him and orders him to drive. He makes him drive as far as Oklahoma City, and that's when he attacked Archer. He overpowered him and locked him in the trunk of his own car. As a mechanic, Archer had tools in his trunk. He used a crowbar to pry open the trunk, and he waited until the car slowed down as Cook made a turn and jumped out. Cook heard the trunk bang. He stopped, got out of the car, and pointed his gun at Archer as he was running away. Cook yelled after him, "You better stop, mister! I'm gonna kill you for sure if you keep running." Archer didn't stop. He said it was either run or be killed by that maniac. Cook didn't think it was worth the time to chase after him, so he pocketed his gun and got back in the car, and he drove off until he ran out of gas on Highway Route 66 between Tulsa and Claremore. He didn't stay with the car, he just kept walking, and he managed to flag down a 1949 Chevy sedan full of a family on their way home from a vacation in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The family was from Atwood, Illinois. 33-year-old Carl Mosser was a farmer. He was traveling with his wife Thelma, she was 29, and their 3 children. Ronald Dean, who was 7, Gary Carl, who was 5, and Pamela Sue, who was 3. The little boys had Hopalong Cassidy hats, and Ronnie, the oldest, had a Hopalong Cassidy wallet that had $1.75 in it. Somehow, Cook, when he robbed the family, did not find that $1.75 in little Ronnie's wallet. The money was still there later on when they were found. Cook made poor Carl Mosser drive 2,500 miles across Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas. But Carl didn't go down without a fight. When they stopped for gas in Wichita Falls, Texas, he tried to free his family. While they were inside the store, Mosser grabbed Cook and started wrestling with him. And the old man who owned the place got scared and pointed a .44 caliber pistol at the 2 men and ordered them out of his store. Mosser pleaded with the old man, quote, "He's been in my car all day. He's got a gun and he says he'll kill us." But the attendant yelled at Carl, "Let him loose." Cook got free, pulled his gun, and subdued Carl Mosser once more. The old man was watching this from his store. He closed the door and he locked it. But as they drove off, he realized what he had done. He went outside, he jumped in his pickup truck, and he gave chase. Cook saw the old man gaining. He told them to stop. He got out. He stood in the middle of the road and he started firing at the old man. This made the old man turn around. He called the police as soon as he got back to his store, but by the time they knew about this, they were long gone to who knows where. It was after leaving this store, he ordered Mosser to drive to Carlsbad, New Mexico. Then he sent him on to El Paso, Texas, to Houston, to Winthrop, Arkansas, and then they ended up back in Joplin. By the time they get here, the 3 kids are really getting restless. They're only 7, 5, and 3. Thelma is having trouble keeping her emotions in check, keeping herself composed. He tells them he's going to tie them up and leave them in a field for somebody to find them. He's not going to hurt them. He cuts strips of cloth from their clothing and uses it to tie the parents up. He ties their hands together. He gags them. He used the yellow cord from the little boys' cowboy hats to tie their wrists. He methodically executes each member of the family and their dog. And killing the dog, there was no reason to kill the dog other than plain old meanness and cruelty. Yeah, it's hard to not have an opinion on this guy. Takes them back to Joplin, where he is familiar with the abandoned mine shafts. Keep in mind, his father had him living in one at one point. I don't know if that's the mine shaft he put them in because he was familiar with it, but it sounds like it was in a similar area. He disposed of them in Joplin near 3rd and Maiden Lane, got back in his car and headed toward Tulsa. When he was in Tulsa, Cook told police later that, quote, "I arrived in Tulsa as people were going to work. I was excited and didn't want to be seen with all of that blood in the car. I swung off on a side street and headed west on a dirt road. I slid into a muddy ditch and had to leave the car." After abandoning the car, he continues to hitchhike and take buses to Blythe, California, and it's those people that picked him up as a hitchhiker from there. Man, how lucky those people were. Shortly after escaping, Archer made his way to the police. His car was located on Route 66. Inside, Cook had left a duffel bag, and police were able to use it to identify who their suspect was. At this point, all they know is he's a punk who stole a car and kidnapped a man who was unharmed. But as they're identifying their suspect, a second car is discovered, covered in blood, dumped near Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's got bullet holes, and there's no sign of the family that owned it. They hadn't returned home when they were supposed to, and the discovery of this car is extremely upsetting. As he cataloged the contents of the car they had found. A policeman is said to have wept when he found those two little Hopalong Cassidy cowboy hats. But there are clues in this car as well. Inside this car, Cook left the receipt for the gun he had used to kill them. Remember, this gun was purchased in El Paso. They now have his prison record. They know he went to Missouri State Penitentiary, that he's 5'6", 145 pounds, that he has tattoos, and a right eye that never shuts. And they also know he grew up in Joplin in an abandoned mine shaft. One of the ways they found the Mosser family's bodies is by examining the mud that he had left in the car from disposing of them. It showed high shale content. They knew where he had grown up, and so they started checking all of those abandoned mine shafts there and managed to find the family. Looks almost like a well. The officers had to physically be lowered straight down into the shaft to retrieve each person, and the family dog, which he also killed. This becomes the biggest manhunt in history, up until that point anyway. Thousands of law enforcement officers are involved in this. Roadblocks were set up in 6 different states. But by then, Billy Cook was 1,600 miles away in Blythe, California. He'd been there for 2 days already by the time the Mosser car was discovered on January 8th, and he had already found another victim. Luckily, this one would live to tell the tale. He was seen by Deputy Sheriff Homer Waldrop. He was suspicious and went to the motel where he had been staying. Billy took him by surprise, jumped from behind the motel room door, disarmed the deputy, and took him hostage. He made Waldrop drive him around for about 40 miles. During their drive, he brags about having murdered this family. After pulling over, Cook told the deputy to lie down, face down, in the ditch. He tied his hands, and he told him he was going to shoot him in the back of the head. But he didn't. Instead, he just walked away, leaving him there. The story is, he went back to the town in California he had lived in for a while, and evidently he had worked in a cafe with this officer's wife, and she had been kind to him. For that reason, he lets the officer live. Using the police car, he pulled over a Seattle salesman named Robert Dewey. He kidnapped Dewey. After a while, Dewey tried to wrestle the gun from him. He was wounded. In the process of doing this, the car careened off the road and into the desert and wrecked. After the wreck, Cook executed Dewey. His body was found in Oglebay, California. Billy Cook's picture is sent to law enforcement from sea to shining sea to even Mexico and Canada. Everybody is looking for this guy. Citizens are terrified. There is this killer on the loose, killing people he doesn't know. People were enraged by what he had done to those children, the cruelty, the fear that that family went through, and the uncertainty of not knowing where he was, who might be next. The entire country was watching and waiting and praying for this guy to get caught. It's hard for us to imagine the fear that people probably felt. This is 1950. Nobody locks their doors. People aren't constantly afraid of strangers. You know, for us now, this is a regular Tuesday. Oh, a stranger went in and blew away a bunch of people he didn't know. But back then, this was unheard of, and it was terrifying. After killing Dewey, Cook took off in Dewey's car and crossed the Mexican border at Tijuana. There he kidnapped 2 more men. They were on a hunting trip, and their names were James Burke and Forrest Dameron. They said, "We saw this guy standing there next to a broken down vehicle, and we could tell he was an American like us, so we stopped to help a fellow American." The experience of these 2 guys is what the movie The Hitchhiker covers. They are with Cook for 8 days. He forces them to drive to the town of Santa Rosalia. They never try to overpower Cook, and maybe that's why they survived their experience. They were asked why they never tried to escape, especially at night. And they said it was because you never knew if he was asleep or not. You've heard the expression, sleep with one eye open? That's literally what Billy Cook did. because that right eye would not close. It always stayed open. So they never knew if he was really looking at them and pretended to be asleep or if he really was asleep. And when they get to Santa Rosalia, Cook is recognized by Police Chief Luis Pera, and he takes him in pretty easily. He walks up to him, he snatches the .32 revolver from his belt, and places him under arrest. There is no extradition treaty between Mexico and the United States, so a big group of officers transport him to the border with the United States and literally push him over the border. And there's a picture of him laying on the ground. He's handcuffed. And initially when I saw the picture, I wondered, what's he doing on the ground like that? Were they roughing him up? Nope, they had just pushed him over the border to get him back into U.S. jurisdiction. And he's taken in to stand trial for his crimes. Billy denied any involvement in the Mosser kidnapping and murder. He said he didn't know him, never met him. Billy said he got drunk Christmas Day in Blythe, California, and then had no memories after that. His legal team decided to plead insanity. He was examined by 7 different psychiatrists. 3 thought he was completely insane, but 4 said he was fit to stand trial. So he did. Billy gave an interview. The article was published on January 27th, where he said he, quote, "never had a friend in all my life. They sent me to a reform school when I was 11. There, they used a rubber hose and beat me all the time. Then I went to the penitentiary, and a bunch of dumb guards hit me on the head every time they saw me. Don't try to keep kidding me about people wanting to help me. I hate their guts. Everybody, and everybody hates my guts." He was initially put on trial in Oklahoma for kidnapping charges. Now, back then, after the Lindbergh baby, that usually meant the death penalty right away. Well, in this case, that did not happen. He was given 300 years with a possibility of parole, and so people were enraged. So what they ended up doing is they sent him to California and tried him for the murder of Robert Dewey. Billy was sent to Alcatraz to begin serving his 300-year sentence while he waited for his second murder trial. I find that interesting because there are only 2 prisons that I have ever toured, and both of them are prisons Billy Cook did time in. After he was sentenced to death, he was moved to death row at San Quentin in California to await his fate. As his execution neared, Billy refused to speak with clergymen. He refused to talk to reporters. His last meal was fried chicken, French fries, peas, and pumpkin pie on December 11th. And he died in the gas chamber on December 12th, 1952. The warden of San Quentin said, quote, "he was the most alone man I have ever encountered." And then his body was brought back here. Thousands of people came to view his body, around 15,000, I think, before the family finally decided to shut everything down and not let any more people come and see him. And so he was brought here to this little cemetery, and he was buried somewhere here in an unmarked grave. Billy was buried here late at night by the light of flashlights and lanterns. There were only 15 people there. This is probably bunk, but according to the newspaper article about his funeral, it said, quote, "just as the gravesite rites ended, the cry of a small child could be heard in the chill of the night air." The bodies of the Mossers were discovered about the time Billy was being arrested in Mexico. When their funerals were held in Atwell, every business in town closed during the services. What had happened to this loving family devastated the town and the country. I don't know why Billy killed this family. The only thing I can think of is a need to destroy what he could not have. A loving mom and dad, 3 happy kids, middle class, going on vacation, the loyal dog. But that's just my own personal theory. Why do you think he killed such innocent, loving people? Billy made an impression on the world, including 4 young men who were in a band called The Doors. You might have heard of them. And you've probably heard their song, Riders on the Storm, which came out in 1971. Verse 2 reads, "Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown, like a dog without a bone, an actor out alone, riders on the storm. There's a killer on the road, his brain is squirming like a toad. Take a long holiday, let your children play. If you give this man a ride, sweet memory will die, killer on the road." How many of you had heard the story of Billy Cook without knowing it? When the movie The Hitchhiker came out in 1953, these events were super fresh in the minds of audiences. This movie is a little unique in that aspect, because usually when they make a movie about a crime like this, it's made years later. So the fact that this came out the same year as his execution is unusual. No one really remembers Billy Cockeyed Campbell anymore. Wait, what? Billy Campbell played the Rocketeer in a Disney movie when I was like 10. But no one really remembers who Billy Campbell is anymore either, to be fair. And that's kind of interesting, because he was such a humongous story in his day. And it's a real sad reality about our society that we could say something like, he only killed 6 people. Because we have become so immersed in horror. We don't even flinch anymore with like a body count of 6. He's just been overshadowed by worse evil, I guess. But the legacy of Billy Cook has had a big effect on how we live our lives. We just don't trust people anymore. And people like him, and those who followed him, are why we don't hitchhike anymore. Thank you so much for joining me today. I want to dedicate this episode to all of the people who were terrorized or killed by Billy Cook. He is the worst person I have ever researched. So as a palate cleanser, I recommend you follow this up by my episode about the best person I have ever researched. Check out my video on Joe Delaney, the hero who gave his life trying to save strangers. If you'd like to support the channel, check me out on patreon.com/MadamMorbid. You can give a super thanks through YouTube. I have merch too, if you're interested. Or just give this video a like, make a comment, share it with your friends, watch the whole thing. You can contact me with comments, ideas, just chat at madammorbidtopics@gmail.com. I want to thank my patrons over on Patreon: Scott Harford, Pamela Tibbetts, Jaya Jayaraja, I hope I said that right, Doris Smither, and Amy Bailey. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will see you next time.